And just keep going with the slides, please. So this is where we are. You'll see this image quite a lot as the program is advancing. It's just a reminder to remind you where you are. We're doing our virtual workshops. Maybe you're already meeting with your mentor and you're setting up your initial goals, or you're already completing some sessions on the LMS. But this is basically to guide you as you're progressing through the program. If you're curious about where am I now? Where should I be? This image here should help you with that. Next slide, please. Next one. Cool. So our agenda for the next 4 days is today we start with a masterclass by Tim and Kacha and a couple other people. We have a few people lined up to help you as you progress through the program. Then we have another masterclass tomorrow. So the first 2 days are very content heavy, deep dives into all the content, right? And then the next 2 days, the third day and the fourth days, will be a bit more hands-on. This is where your mentors will guide you through thinking about building and communicating a value proposition for your projects, building coalitions and such. Same as the fourth day, we'll be talking about enabling systems change, and then we'll have a closing session. And then each day we have an hour of coffee talks or networking sessions, if you would, whichever you prefer. And they will be in the room that you just came from. And I've already sent that invitation to all of you. So if you're lost, that's where you'll find it in your calendar. Next slide. Thanks. So these are the goals for our workshops this week. And not to worry, the slides will also be on the LMS. So the slides and the recordings will also be on the LMS. But if you want to take notes for yourself, feel free to do so. So this week, we want to build shared knowledge about mainstreaming participation. We want to evaluate the best practices and identify areas for improvement using your projects, of course. We want to talk about the legal frameworks and policies and practices that support or hinder the projects that you're working on. We also want to talk about the strategic plans for your challenges and a whole bunch of other goals. Next slide. So what do we expect from you this week? My goal is, I know we're not in Kenya, but let's pretend we are together somehow. We are connected via this Zoom room. So let's be active. I understand we don't all engage at the same level. Engage however you feel free. Raise your hand, put in the chat, whichever you're comfortable with. But this is your space to learn, engage, and connect with your peers. And I want you to use it fully, because the next session we'll be together is on in July, and we're all working towards similar goals. It'll be good to just engage with the people that you have now. You also have mentors. We also have people-powered members that might pop in once in a while. So just be open to engaging with other people, new people you haven't talked to before, and be willing to collaborate with new people and be respectful in how we communicate and talk to each other. Next slide, please. These are the speakers for this week. Most of these people you're familiar with, and you'll see all of them during the week. But today we're starting with Tim Hughes from OGP, and then tomorrow we'll go with Nikhil, and he will be talking about the legal frameworks of mainstreaming participation, and the rest are your mentors. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just an image of who's in the room. This is the MPA cohort. So we are covering the whole globe. We're from South Africa, where I am, to Canada, to Mongolia. We have everyone in this cohort. So like I said, be open to connecting with everyone that's in this cohort and in this room, because there's a lot of experiences, perspectives that you can really learn from. Next slide. All right. So that's me. I've done enough talking. You're not going to learn much from me. I'm going to give it over to Tim Hughes, who's going to start us off with the session on mainstreaming participation. It's a masterclass. Tim?
Great. Thank you very much, Mel. So maybe just to start off, a quick introduction to who I am, so you have a sense of kind of where I'm coming from, and I guess kind of also why I'm interested in this topic as well. So nowadays I work for OGP, supporting our member countries and local members across different topics, including public participation. But I've been working on participation for probably just over 15 years now. So previously, I was director of Involve, which is a UK based civil society organisation working with government, kind of primarily in the UK, but all different levels around innovating in public participation, but also trying to embed public participation more in the way that government works as well. So a lot of kind of what we are going to be talking about, I guess, kind of draws a little bit from my own experience of where I guess we hit some of the limitations within the current way that government works of, I guess, how much impact, how much success we can have with participation. And we will kind of come on to that in a few moments. But really, what we want to get out of this session today is to give everybody a kind of, I guess, a level playing field and kind of a basis for thinking around kind of what is mainstream participation, why does it matter, and what are some of the approaches that we can take towards it. So hopefully by the end of the couple of hours we have with you today, we've kind of built that base then for the rest of the sessions this week. So before we do anything else, we want to do a quick exercise with you all. So we're going to pull up a Mentimeter slide. And here we want to just start off thinking around kind of what are some of the barriers that are stopping participation being mainstreamed in government decision making. So kind of what gets in the way of it, what stops participation from being the standard way that policy making, policies get made, decisions get made in government. So you should either be able to scan your QR code or click the link or just put the link into your browser with the code, and then you can start to enter the barriers that you see. Mel's also posted a link in the chat as well. That's a nice quick way of accessing it. So can we also can we bring up the Mentimeter?
Ryan, are you able to switch? Thanks.
It's waiting for presentation to start.
Let's see. Maybe let me share screen. I can share that. Thanks. Here we go. Can you see the answers, team?
Yeah, I can see those now. The mine is still saying waiting for presentation to start. Is anybody else having that issue?
I wonder why. I'll check that just now after this one. Let's see.
So,
okay, cool. I've got it. Technology. Here we go.
oh, yeah, great. I think that's probably popping up for everybody as well now.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Lots.
Okay. So, yeah, lots have been submitted already. Keep submitting them. Just as you're doing that, I will call out a few that I'm seeing. So, lack of political goodwill, lack of political interest comes up a couple of times there. Not wanting to share power as well comes up. I suspect that one will be quite a common one. Yeah, lack of political will is further down as well. Funding seems to be coming up a few times as well. So we've got time and budgetary limitations, lack of political will and funding. Tyrannical approach to decision making, risk aversion, Increased cost of governance. I think that's an interesting one for us to be thinking around as well. Does this increase or decrease the cost of governance? Institutional distrust and lack of public efficiency. Low motivation from decision makers. I guess that also links to lack of political goodwill. Gotcha political culture. I think that's an interesting one. Political ignorance of the benefits. Not enough time, red tape, slow decision making, civic spaces. Quite a few also linking to legal framework, lack of laws and regulations. We'll touch on that today, but as Mel said, ICNL will particularly be looking at that tomorrow. And we've got a few more kind of around weak governance. Inadequate awareness as well. So I think as we go through the session today, but also kind of as we think around where the action plans that you're going to be working on, and also the discussions you're going to be having over the next few days, useful to be thinking back to these barriers and to what extent we might be addressing them as we think about the different opportunities there are for mainstreaming participation. But so just to kind of start us off, I'm going to talk us through a few different ways of thinking around mainstreaming participation, including kind of what it is, why it's important, and how it can be achieved. And then after that, we'll hear a couple of case studies, different examples from a couple of countries of initiatives to mainstream participation, and then think around some of the opportunities as well. So if we can move on to the next slide. So really, when we think around kind of mainstream participation or institutionalizing participation, there are kind of four different ways that we can be thinking about this. And these all, I think, link to some of the weaknesses and shortcomings of the approaches, I guess, we see to participation. And I mean, this was true of my work in the past as well. So the first is that often opportunities for participation tend to be quite sporadic at the moment, or at the very least, kind of high quality opportunities for participation tend to be sporadic, and they're often the result of a particular individual. Maybe it's a politician, maybe it's a public servant who has kind of energy and kind of sees the benefit of participation, but it's reliant on that person. And it's kind of a one-off opportunity often. So one way we can think about mainstream participation is moving from those sporadic opportunities for participation to becoming a much more commonplace, regular occurrence in the way that government works, in the way that democracy works as well. The second part is the shift from poor quality to high quality forms of participation. So actually, I think arguably some of the most mainstreamed or institutionalized forms of participation are some of the lowest quality at the moment, unfortunately. So if we look at the way that, I guess, public consultations tend to take place, particularly where they are a kind of a legal requirement, they often tend to be fairly low quality forms of participation. So sometimes it's a PDF that goes up on a government website, and people have to make written representations, and there's no clear process for how those then get taken on board, and the quality of that participation tends to be experienced to be pretty low by those who take part. So another way that we can think about how we might want to mainstream or institutionalize participation is moving from poor quality to high quality. That then links to the third of these, so the impact of participation. So often, at least in my experience, participation, even where the participatory process is successful, where it might have developed some interesting recommendations, where the participants might be really engaged and enthusiastic about the work that they're doing, often, unfortunately, it then fails at the final hurdle of actually influencing decision making or kind of shaping policy making. So the third way that we can think about how we might mainstream institutionalized participation is kind of making that connection much stronger between participation and then policy making, decision making on the other hand, and making sure that I guess participation is fully integrated into the way that policies and decisions get made. And then the final way I think we can think about this is moving from quite an inconsistent approach often to more of a consistent approach. So often within, I guess, governments and also, I guess, within individual ministries or agencies, participation can be quite variable. There can be some good examples of it happening, but then poor quality examples happening alongside it. There can be, I guess, multiple consultations around similar issues which don't speak to one another. So developing more of a consistent approach can be, I guess, the fourth way that we might think around how we mainstream participation. So if we can move on to the next slide. The problem is that all of this is quite hard to do. So particularly turning innovations in participation. So some of the exciting ways that we're seeing governments and like civil society organizations engage with citizens, it can be quite hard to make those mainstream practice. And some of those reasons we've already heard from the previous exercise, but it could be issues around there being a lack of robust and actionable tools and support for policymakers to do this, lack of political buy-in. We've already talked around government indifference as well, feelings of isolation and frustration, an absence of a legal framework, issues to sustain public participation, it can be insufficient funding and resources. So as we think around how we might mainstream participation, as I said, it's good to think around kind of how we might start to limit or remove some of these barriers to participation being more commonplace, higher quality, higher impact, and more consistent. So we move on to the next slide. So there are a range of different approaches that we're seeing already being taken to do this. And so we've come up with this framework within OGP based around kind of what we're seeing from OGP member countries and beyond. And for each of these, we're kind of collecting together some examples of different initiatives as well. So you can scan the QR code at the top there, but I can also share the link in the chat to the document. This is all in draft at the moment, and we're looking for more examples to add to this. But this includes these different ways or these different approaches and some examples of different countries, different cities and local governments that are using them. So there are some which focus around developing frameworks, minimum standards, guidance for public participation. So ways that public servants particularly can be supported to make sure that they know what good looks like, and they have supporting materials to guide that. There's a second kind of group of approaches that we're seeing around institutionalizing particular participatory mechanisms within government structures. So often at the moment, this might be in relation to things like citizen assemblies. So developing kind of standing citizen assemblies is one example of this, or it might be developing an online digital platform to support participation. So particular mechanisms that are being embedded. The third approach that we're seeing is around introducing new rights and legal requirements for participation. So making it a legal requirement that it happens at particular points in the policymaking process. As said, we'll talk about that a bit more tomorrow. I think one that we'll particularly hear about a bit more today from one of our case studies is establishing participation teams, centres of excellence, and independent participation bodies. So actually having dedicated functions within government that help to oversee and coordinate, but also provide skills and capacity to other parts of government to do participation well. We're also seeing the allocation of new budgets and resources for participation. The next one around fostering institutional kind of culture of openness and collaboration. So that might be building participation into training programs for public servants. It might be around changing the way that public servants are evaluated within their kind of professional development. It might be about adding participation competencies to the work that policymakers and practitioners do. So, so lots of different ways that that can happen. And then finally, which links also to our first set of conversations today, around eliminating structural barriers that hinder inclusive participation. So there are examples, and yeah, particularly one from France as well, that we will hear a bit more later on around how some of those barriers for the public to engage can start to be removed as well. So if we move on to the next slide, so there are a few examples that we've just picked out here, but there are many more in the document I've shared that point to these different approaches. So one from Croatia, where they've introduced amendments to the rules of procedure to require proposals of draft laws to undergo a consultative process. So whenever something is going to Parliament to become legislation, there's a requirement that it must go through public consultation. There's an example from Finland where they've developed a national public dialogue method, which is now becoming embedded. So it's happened on multiple different issues now, and they're kind of building up skills and supporting supportive, I guess, kind of institutional structures around it. There's an example from Armenia as well, which is establishing a participatory governance unit. So one of these kind of central kind of government teams to support participation. And then from France on defining a citizen participant status to support, particularly to support people who are involved in long-term deliberative initiatives. So kind of recognizing their involvement and being able to provide perhaps kind of monetary support to for them to be able to engage, but also the right to kind of take leave from employment and things like that as well. But we'll hear a bit more about that from Tiffany in a bit. So final couple of things just to touch on. So I think it's really important as we think around mainstreaming participation to recognise that this is about systems change. So really, we're thinking around actually sort of fundamentally the way that the current system of government works isn't always conducive to public participation happening meaningfully. So actually, we need to think about how we might start to shift that system to be more inclined, more supportive of public participation. So the model on the screen at the moment is called the Waters of Systems Change, and we will come to this a bit more at the end of the week. But it's a useful framework, I think, for thinking around how participation can best be achieved, and particularly how to build it into the system of governments. And really, the idea is that it recognises that the change needs to happen on multiple different levels. So at the top of I guess the inverted pyramid here, you can see some of the more explicit things that we often think about. So policies, practices, resource flows. So those could be, I guess, policies that support participation. It could be around kind of regular practice of how policymaking takes place. It could be around how participation is or isn't currently resourced, and in comparison to other government functions. So there are some very obvious things there that, and I guess obvious barriers that we might tend to encounter that stop participation being effective. But then as we kind of go down the inverted pyramid, things become, I guess, a little bit more implicit and behind the scenes, but in many ways might be more transformative, or might be more important for actually why participation does or does not take place. And so at the tip of the pyramid there, at the bottom, you can see mental models being a really key thing that I think we really need to think around. So here, what we mean is kind of the ways that we think about things like kind of how how policy should be made, or what the role of a politician or a minister is, what the role of a policymaker is, what the role of a citizen is. And these mental models that we kind of have, and we all have, and we often don't necessarily challenge them, are really key then for actually how the system around us works. And so we need to start to unpick some of those and to shift those mental models towards things that are perhaps more conducive to the way to kind of mainstream participation. So we will talk, I think, a bit more about that as we go through the week. So I think one final slide from me to make this a little bit more practical. And so as we're thinking around mainstream participation, really important to think about this really strategically and kind of addressing these different levels. So first of all, how do policies and processes need to adapt to incorporate public participation? So what about the ways that policy making currently happens needs to change? And yeah, kind of how can public participation be best incorporated into that? Kind of links to that is what new skills and capacities do governments need to engage the public effectively? And how can we make sure that policymakers have access to those skills and capabilities? Then what regulations and laws are required to support that? So what is the legal framework that's needed to make all of this possible and I guess more likely? How do institutional cultures and mindsets need to adapt to value public participation? And I think there are at least 2 or 3 barriers that we identified at the start, which links to this. So how do we move from this kind of, I guess, skepticism of the public, or this kind of sense of, I guess, kind of elites maybe knowing best or policymakers knowing best, so to actually changing those cultures and mindsets to being more open and accepting of the need to engage the public. And then links to that, kind of what political leadership is needed to support change as well. So I think if we start to think about all of these different layers and where we particularly can make change happen within them, then we can start to get onto this kind of path of mainstreaming participation. So I think that was my final slide. Maybe one more just quickly, and we will, I think, mention this probably a few times during the week as well, is the OpenGov Challenge. So this is something that OGP launched last year, and it covers 10 different policy areas, but the one on participation is particularly focused around mainstreaming participation. And here we are calling on OGP members, but also if you're from a local government that's part of a country that's part of OGP, you can also participate as well. And you can submit your commitments to the OpenGov Challenge around mainstream participation as your contribution towards this challenge. And there is a particular deadline at the end of this month, so end of May, to submit your reforms to be considered for the OpenGov Awards, which will be judged and then will be given at the next OGP Global Summit in Spain in October. So I wanted to just kind of quickly mention this again as a key opportunity to hopefully also get some political buy-in for this as well. This is a good opportunity to kind of showcase the work that your kind of national government or local government is doing, a way to get politicians to hopefully take notice as well, and hopefully a way to kind of maybe supercharge some of the efforts that you might be making towards this. So I think that is now the end of my slides, and we've all been on a call for just over an hour now. So I think we're going to take a 10-minute break now. Then when we come back, we will hear a couple of case studies to make this all a bit more kind of practical, and hear some of the successes, maybe some of the challenges as well that people are going through, already embedding these reforms. And then, yeah, we'll take the conversation from there. So 10 minutes. So we'll come back at 20 past the